But I'm very excited about like the last day that I will give with you any thought like of my life, and then I'm like enough. It's like a bad relationship.
Okay, so we just started out bad relationship. It's been a torrid relationship, really. Okay, we got one person. So I'm sure we can start now. So hello. You are here watching a Zero Books Capital Comrades special on the seminal 1988 philosophical text by the famed French philosopher Alain Badiou, Being an Event. And today we are going to be going through part 7 of Being an Event, the generic, indiscernible, and truth. The event, P.J. Cohen. That's Paul Joseph Cohen, was very significant for his developments in axiomatic set theory. And this chapter is quite difficult. I really don't have a great mathematical background. Fortunately, Mari is here to help, insofar as she's able to digest all of this, because it is a lot. So we're going to get doing that. Any before we start, any thoughts on this, Mari? Any thoughts on this section?
I'm relatively positive about this part, more so than the previous math parts. And I think what helped me was like the 2 little drawings that he did at some point. I'm a very visual person. So seeing this up, I was like, oh, that's what you're talking about. Cool, that's easy.
Personally, I just tend to ignore. Personally, I just tend to ignore diagrams in philosophy books. I usually just assume like they're total nonsense, just like placed there with the goal of making the whole thing. But actually, my favorite line on diagrams was Nick Cernicek, and he told me that his goal was to place more diagrams in his books so that people in like aesthetics fields and stuff would be like scared away and they wouldn't use his work for that. So
for my final philosophy paper in philosophy of mind, it was like my last class seminar thing at school. I remember we had like a 20 page limit, and I had, I think, 15 pages of text and 5 pages of diagrams.
That's an awesome way to fill pages. Actually, I should do that. I don't know if diagrams can be made to fill word count so efficiently, but that's a good strategy. Though.
But I had really beautiful stuff. Like I put in a lot of work into my diagrams. Anyways.
Cool. I have no doubt at your ability to draw impeccable diagrams. All right. I just want to say to our audience, by the way, also you should check out after you watch this, of course, if you're interested, and if you're still feeling in the holiday mood, we did record a Christmas, or as we call it, Christmarks special. Dealing with Christmas Carol in relationship to Benjamin and theories of democracy, as well as Slavoj Žižek and Alain Badiou's mingling of Christology with Marxism. So if you're curious about that stuff, check out our Christmarks special. But now, and Mari, of course, the beautiful Mari, also appeared on our Christmarks, really awkward Christmarks special. So I guess we should get started on this. We got meditation 31, the thought of the generic and being in truth. Okay. So we should maybe go to the second paragraph. The term generic positively designates that what does not allow itself to be discerned is in reality the general truth of the situation, the truth of its being, as considered as the foundation of all knowledge to come. Indiscernible implies a negation, which nevertheless retains this essential point. A truth is always that which makes a whole in knowledge, right? So it's like, I guess, I think part of the idea that Badiou's been getting.
I fucking hate this. Like, I always hate that premise. It's like, no.
No. I think the idea that Badiou is getting at here, which is, very Hegelian as well, which he trots out variously throughout this text. Like when he talks about the role of the void, is that like, and also Lacanian, right? Which is interesting as well. It's this sort of constitutive negativity, right? So if you think of like, you know, Lacan, like there's always a sort of gap in the symbolic order, right? And I think maybe in the most archetypal sense, this is signified by the domain of sexuality, right? Like sexuality always appears to you like as a not all, right? You know, if you actually get it, right? It's like the non-appearance of it that drives the sexual, right? Or the, like if you actually get sex, it's never as good as, you know, sort of like the desire, right? That is based on that absence. Does that make sense?
And also maybe like, I guess, is that kind of how forms function? Because like nothing that is like, no circle in nature is actually a circle, right? But they all have something in common, which is the idea of the circle, the form of the circle. So it is the general as well, right?
Well, I mean, Badiou's point is sort of like, you know, this whole sort of edifice, right? You know, you look at like, you know, the state of the situation, like the count as one, like it can only function through a kind of constitutive exclusion, right? And it's the assurance that there'll always be such an exclusion that is what makes his, you know,
whole thing stick together.
Yeah, well, it makes it mobile, right? Yeah. And subject to a kind of constant displacement. But here he says, the generic positively designates that what does not allow itself to be discerned is in reality the general truth of a situation. So yeah, again, we have this idea of constitutive negativity. Indiscernible implies negation, which nevertheless retains this essential point. A truth is always that which makes a whole in a knowledge. So truth, right? I guess the idea here is that like the indiscernible, I mean, I'm like the indiscernible, if I understand, is this drawing attention, would you say, to like the constitutive gap?
I just like, for me, indiscernible is like not particular. It's like not a thing. A thing is a thing. Like we're not talking about a thing. So like a concept, like a word, like a name, right? White versus this white. That's kind of how I got it, but I'm just reading Bergson here.
It indicates uniquely via non-discernibility that what is at stake is subtracted from knowledge or from exact nomination. Okay, so the indiscernible then designates something which is, it's a way of like, it's a kind of like substituted designation of something that's not there. That's how I would read that, right? Like I don't think it's not fully discerned, hence indiscernible, but it draws some kind of attention to that.
But it gathers the stuff, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we get to that later, like through knowledge and inquiry. So maybe we can say that we're not sure what it means to be indiscernible.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of introduces the terms, right, and then develops them. So what this means is that everything is at stake in the thought of the truth-knowledge couple. What this amounts to, in fact, is thinking of the relation, which is rather a non-relation, between, on one hand, a post-evental fidelity, and on the other hand, a fixed state of knowledge, or what I term below the encyclopedia of the situation. And I like how he just like, in true form, he just points below. He's like, this won't make sense until you get down there.
Yeah, but you know what it also is? It's the event. That is what is discernible, right? Which has that like linkage with knowledge, but not with truth.
Truth. Fixed state of knowledge is knowledge. So he's differentiating between the event, which is like what affords us truth, and like the kind of canonical knowledge of a situation, right?
But I didn't also, for him, event is truth. That was totally not what I got.
No, like he says here, like post-evental fidelity, and on the other hand, a fixed state of knowledge, right? So knowledge for him has a certain connotation of fixity. I mean, we could keep going and see where that goes, but
yeah.
Like the problem, the key to the problem is the mode in which the procedure of fidelity traverses existent knowledge, starting at the supernumerary point, which is at the name of the event. The main stages of this thinking, which is necessary at its very limit here, are the following. The study of local or finite forms of a procedure of fidelity, inquiries, the distinction between the true and the veridical, and the demonstration that every truth is necessarily infinite, the question of the generic and thus of truths, the examination of the manner in which a procedure of truth subtracts itself from this or that jurisdiction of knowledge, avoidance, and the definition of a generic procedure of fidelity. Right.
I'm not gonna press on this, but in the demonstration that every truth is necessarily infinite, like just like from the math of the truth, it didn't really like seem like the math of the event, but I might be wrong. But yeah, like you're right that I don't know, we'll get to it, but I don't think event is the truth.
Well, math in a way, but it's not like philosophy, for example, only cites like the inconsistent multiplicity, right? So like Badiou's point isn't about like, I mean, it's not necessarily about, because he kind of says like this stuff about like infinity, like we could say, you know, we could, like it already is, you know, requires a certain kind of fidelity to suggest that this is really like an ontological mapping of reality, but these seem to be the tools which are most adequate to it. But his main point would be, you know, the way that sets are sort of regrouped, right? That you know. So, but I guess what I'm saying is it's manifesting within particular context. That's the only visibility it affords.
Right, but the whole point is that like when you're inside of it, you don't have access to it. So that means that when you're inside of the event, you don't have access to the event.
I mean, you don't have access from whence the event issues, I think would be more like, but you have an access, you have like, there's a difference between between, you know, truth knowledge, you know, inclusion, you know, or belonging and inclusion, we should say, right? That is discernible, right? In that moment, if that makes sense.
Okay. Never mind. Let's go. Let's keep going. Fake it till you make it.
Okay, knowledge revisited. Knowledge is the capacity to discern multiples within the situation which possess this or that property. Properties that can be indicated by explicit phrases of the language or sets of phrases. The rule of knowledge is always a criterion of exact nomination. In the last analysis, the constitutive operations of every domain of knowledge are discernment, such a presented or thinkable multiple possesses such and such a property, and classification. I can group together and designate by their common property those multiples that I discern as having a nameable characteristic in common.
So that's the thing. Indiscernible is something that we can say if it does or does not possess a property.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should read a bit further and like get the deets
Okay.
on indiscernible. We have read this already, by the way. It's just not something you read once and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
So we have two.
Yeah, I know we have read this. I spent the whole day today fucking reading.
Well, you are devoted. You're a good foot soldier. So here we have two different. We have discernment, right? So it's the designation of such a presented or thinkable multiple possesses such and such a property, and classification. So on one hand, you have the association of properties with the things, which is discernment, and then you have classification, which is the grouping together, right, of these different things in relation to their properties, right? Discernment concerns the connection between language and presented or presentable realities. It is orientation towards presentation. Classification concerns the connection between the language and the parts of a situation, the multiple of multiples. It is oriented toward representation. So like there's like an epistemological necessity associated with this process of grouping.
Yeah, Bergson views this completely differently, just for a second, because it's so much more interesting. It's basically like, I mean, I don't really get it, but it has to do with memory and how memory works, and how you have to like, so when you have a memory and then you have another memory, basically what you have to do is you have to take out what's in common, and then like you have to discern between what is special, and when you have what is common, that's how you build the generality. But the problem is that the generality is also what allows you to figure out what's common between two memories. And so there's this thing of like, well, how does it work? Because you need to generalize in order to abstract, and you need to abstract in order to generalize. And then I think the answer is that it's the body, right? Like the muscle memory of you being in a situation and in a different situation that is a little similar to the situation. And it's like the body that does the generalization and the abstraction, because how the body acts in one and then in the other.
Yeah, which fits with like a vitalistic theory of, right, or kind of animistic theory, right? Like, you know, because like it's like for Aristotle, like, you know, the anima is not like a soul; it's like a principle of movement, right? Which is like which allows him to not adopt such a binary view of like humans, non-humans, you know. So in De Anima, for example. But yeah, I'm very interested in that stuff. I think it's cool. We should get back to this.
We can do inquiries. I don't have anything else in knowledge.
So I just want to get to the encyclopedia part because I think it's important. Like, knowledge is realized as an encyclopedia. An encyclopedia must be understood here as a summation of judgments under a common determinant. Knowledge, in its innumerable compartmentalized and entangled domains, can therefore be thought, with regards to its being, as assigning to this or that multiple an encyclopedic determinant by means of which the multiple finds itself belonging to a set of multiples. That is, to a part. Yeah, so here we go. So we have knowledge, which involves discernment and classification, right? So we'll go on to inquiries then?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and feel free to, if you want to interject, because I'm sort of taking some of the stuff.
No,
if you want
take it. Okay. Take it.
Yeah. No problem, yeah. Two inquiries. A fidelity, meditation 23, is not a matter of knowledge. It is not the work of an expert. It is the work of a militant. Militant designates equally the feverish exploration of the effects of a new theorem, the Cubist precipitation of the Braque-Picasso tandem, the effect of a retroactive intervention upon the Cézanne event, the activity of St. Paul, and that of the militants of an organisation politique, right? The operator of faithful connection designates another mode of discernment, one which outside knowledge, but within the effect of an interventional nomination, explores connections to the supernumerary name of the event. So to give the example of St. Paul, I think what Badiou credits St. Paul with in St. Paul Foundation of Humanism or something, or the exact title. But I think what he credits him with is like creating a notion of the human as like a universal category. Right. So you can see what happens here is like, you know, there's a rupture with a conventional process of classification, right? A kind of short circuit that's introduced, in which like the ordering of the terms is fundamentally disrupted, right? In a way that has a certain like kind of subversive capacity. So he's saying, but this can't be circumscribed or attributed purely to the domain of knowledge. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. When I recognize that a multiple which belongs to the situation is connected or not to the name of the event, I perform the minimal gesture of fidelity, the observation of connection or non-connection. The actual meaning of this gesture, which provides the foundation of being the entire process constituted by fidelity, naturally depends on the name of the event. But my goal is not a phenomenology. It is a greater logic. I will thus place myself in the following abstract situation. So he's saying here, like the goal isn't just to, when you go through this process of fidelity, he uses the greater logic of Hegel. He's differentiating with the phenomenology. So the phenomenology is sort of a chronicle of human experience as it progresses toward the development of categories which enjoy a certain self-subsistence vis-a-vis individual experience, right? So you can think of mathematics as being like a very archetypal example, right? Of like, you know, there's a certain independence from experience, right? And mathematics becomes, you know, constitutive of philosophy in a way, right? That drive to create like knowledge, which is independently true. So he's saying here, like the eventual fidelity isn't
not that
just
I
like,
believe in that, but okay.
Okay, yeah. It's not just based on your phenomenological perception. You're actually trying to reach to something outside of that. Right?
Transcendence. Something.
Yeah. Well, it's a big theme in this.
Yeah, it's fine. Each to their own.
We will term inquiry. So he says the minimal gesture of fidelity tied to the encounter between a multiple of the situation and a vector of the operator of fidelity. And one would imagine this happens initially in the environs of the event site has one of two meanings. There's a connection or a non-connection. We will term inquiry any finite set of such minimal reports. An inquiry is thus a finite state of the process of fidelity. So it's a sort of a summing up of the result, right? That's advanced with respect to connection or non-connection in this militant deviation, right?
Yeah. It's just the question of whether something does or does not have a property.
Yeah. So there's a necessarily divergence from the dominant and canon of knowledge or encyclopedia. That's okay. So we move on to 3, truth and veridicity.
But that's because, right, that's because all knowledge does is group things by properties, or like it discerns things. That's the point about knowledge. So it makes sense that everything has to either be in it or not in it. It's like drawing lines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Though it's interesting because the geometric analogy strikes me as very Deleuzian somehow, right? Because it's like
it is,
yeah.
but it's just a much easier way of saying like what he said in 3, right? Like you draw a line, you have a thing on one side and a thing on the other side, and that's it. Cool. Yeah, continue.
Okay, truth and veridicity. Let's see what Okay, I actually didn't put anything for truth and veridicity.
I put a thing.
Okay, what did you put?
The second paragraph, like 6 lines down. However, every finite part of the situation is classified by at least one knowledge. The results of an inquiry coincide with an encyclopedic determinant. This is entailed by every presented multiple being nameable in the language of the situation. So I think that's also very important, right? Like knowledge does the naming, it does the discerning, it does the classification, and we're looking for the truth, which is everything that's
so the tension, right?
opposite. Yeah. And then then on the next page. I don't know if you have anything on the next page.
Yeah, so there's a tension. I guess like even if nomination is evasive or belongs to a very general determinant, like it's a mountain or it's a naval battle, nothing in the situation is radically subtracted from names. This moreover is the reason why the world is full, and however strange it may seem at first in certain circumstances, it can always be rightfully held to be linguistically familiar. Right? So there's a tension between like the self-enclosure of language and the effort to sort of break out of it, right, in the process of making these kind of inquiries, right?
Yeah.
In order to clarify this,
continue. Perfect. Yeah, that part.
In order to clarify the situation, we will term veridical the following situation, which can be controlled by a knowledge. Such a part of the situation is answerable to such an encyclopedic determinant. We will term true the statement controlled by the procedure of fidelity, thus attached to the event and the intervention. Such a part of the situation groups together multiples connected or unconnected to the supernumerary name of the event. What is at stake in the present argument is entirely bound up in the choice of the adjective true. So actually, it's
totally right. The true is the event. It's a home is bad.
The only thing the thing that really gets you to survive this book is how like redundant the basic theme is, even if like it's all very couched and very complex stuff. So on page 352, I think actually he gives like a good example of this. So he talks about vulgar Marxism and vulgar Freudianism. So his example of vulgar Marxism, if I understand properly, is like just to see like, it's like economism, just seeing like the proletariat as the absolute agent of history, like it's not such a historical or broad thing. And vulgar Freudianism for him is like the Freudianism of the American school, which reduced sort of development to these like linear genital stages, right? And like Lacan sort of like rebelled against. So, so he talks here about Marxism. But it thought the working class as the class of workers. Naturally, the workers, in terms of pure multiples, formed an infinite class. It was not the sum total of empirical workers that was at stake. Yet this did not prevent knowledge, and paradoxically Marxist knowledge itself, from being forever able to consider the workers as falling under an encyclopedic determinant, sociological, economical, etc., the event as having nothing to do with this always already counted, and the supposed truth as being merely a veridicity submitted to the language of the situation. So I think it's interesting, and I think Badiou here has to be influenced by, Maoism as well, right? Which situates class conflict in a different domain, right? Like Mao was looking more toward like the peasant classes in China, than like a sort of industrial proletariat to support his revolution. So you see the way that there's a possibility for, an inquiry.
But I guess China has a lot more peasants than UK.
Yeah, well, of course, and this is like the real paradox of Marxism historically, is that the places where political Marxism was most successful were not the places that Marx necessarily wrote of revolution transpiring, right? They didn't necessarily have working classes that were that big, or at least they weren't necessarily hegemonic, right? And the same could be said of Russia or Yugoslavia to some degree as well. I don't think as extremely as China, but
yeah.
And yeah, so he talks about, Lacan, who sort of had to save fidelity to Freud by placing the distinction between knowledge and truth at the center of his thought, and severely separate the discourse of the analyst from what he called the discourse of the university. Infinity, however necessary, will thus not be able to serve as the unique criterion for the indiscernibility of faithful truths. Are we capable of proposing a sufficient criterion? So here's like getting a little bit to what you were saying. Like he's saying, like, because affinity doesn't like appear, right? Like you can't predicate, like you have to find a way of like rendering the indiscernible, right? Actualizing the indiscernible without appealing to infinity. Right?
Yeah. How are events infinity? But I guess we did this already. Because how is that? Do you remember that?
How is what?
Like how is an event not just like a thing? Do you remember that?
Like because like
because it gets like retroactively determined, and you have that like dice thing, and so it has like infinite possibilities of like whether to be or not to be or something like that.
Well, obviously it represents like a disjunction with respect to the situation, right? Which is made clear here in terms of knowledge and truth and like connection and disconnection. But I mean, like again, like infinity, and I think really the status of the void is sort of I think supposed. It's based on an analogy with mathematics that Badiou is a little bit ambiguous about, right? But I think what he's really trying to, it's interesting because you have to go back to what he originally talks about, and what he's originally trying to talk about is like the way that philosophy has tended to posit disorder as being pervasive, right? And things is always changing, or to posit things is always in a state of stasis. But like neither of these suppositions can do justice, because like, if you posit everything is eternally in disorder, then you lose a conception of stability, which is necessary to think reality. But if you do the alternative, you lose novelty, right? So in a way, it's the tension between these two terms that drives him to situate infinity within this process of emergence of the event. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, intuitively, yeah. I think like 4 or 5 weeks ago, I maybe had a better understanding. Like I could remember better, and I don't know, but it's fine.
Yeah, we gotta get back into it.
Yeah.
So we'll go to 4.
Generic.
Yeah. Our goal then is to found this upon the structure of knowledge referred to the finite character of the inquiries, a characterization of truth as infinite part of the situation. The general idea is to consider that a truth groups together all the terms of the situation which are positively connected to the event. Why this privilege of positive connection of X plus? Because what is negatively connected does no more than repeat the pre-evental situation. From the standpoint of the procedure of fidelity, a term encountered and investigated negatively has no relation whatsoever with the name of the event, and thus it is in no way concerned by that event. It will not enter into the new multiple that is a post-eventual truth, since with regard to the fidelity, it turns out to have no connection to the supernumerary name. So yeah, there's a privilege of the assertion of positive connections.
Yeah.
Our problem is finally the following. On what condition can one be sure that the set of terms of the situation which are positively connected to the event is in no manner already classified within the encyclopedia of the situation? We cannot direct. So how do you make sure that the stuff you're talking about is actually new? If you're having to use like an older lexicon to refer to it. We cannot directly formulate this potential condition by an examination of the infinite set of these terms, because this set is always to come. Moreover,
but you're always using the older one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's not go there. But yeah,
well,
okay.
that's what he's trying to deal with, right?
Yeah.
This is always to come, and moreover, it is randomly composed by the trajectory of the inquiries. A term is encountered by the procedure, and the finite inquiry in which it figures attests that it is positively connected. It's an X plus. Our condition must not. Okay. Belong to this term and others which do not. The result is that the infinite class which totalizes the inquiries according to the positive cannot coincide with the class subsumed by the.
So the point is that like it also avoids the knowledge, right? I mean, because it makes a whole, whatever. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a way, it's like, you know, there's a connection with post-structuralism certainly here in terms of, you know, like Derrida was interested sort of in the idea that like if you I mean, in general, like
I guess it's kind of like Deleuze's territorialization and then deterritorialization, right? Where like the territorialization is this stable thing, but then when you deterritorialize, you create something new. In the sense that like you're avoiding the determinant, right? You're breaking away from the space.
Yeah. Well, it's what Catherine Malibu calls plasticity, which we find quite characteristic of post-structuralism, right?
I like that.
I think, you know, like Derrida, of course, says there's always this like failure where like, you know, the signifier can't reach the signified, right? And this is like something that philosophy is always embarrassed about, and it has to like cover up. And like philosophy has to have a terminus if it's to theorize about reality, where it's like, oh wait, we reach the signified. And Badiou's point isn't to argue for like the ultimate adequacy of these terms, hence his blocking out of the infinite. But his point is to argue for a process of novelty, right? And so the question here arises, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around it fully. But the question, what he's trying to say here is, it is sufficient within that procedure there at least one inquiry which avoids this determinant. The presence of this particular finite inquiry is enough to ensure that the infinite faithful procedure does not coincide with the determinant in question. So, like for example, if we were to say like there's this whole, I think an interesting example is this whole debate about you know, how to deal with like transgender athletes. Have you heard about this? Like,
how to do what?
How to deal with like transgender athletes. Have you heard about this?
I can't believe anyone is. But okay,
it's a big thing because like there are like some men who've transitioned who are very successful in certain athletic fields. So there are different like so there are different. It's very interesting, and there's a lot of transphobia in the UK. But it's very interesting, like because
I know
it's true.
There's a lot of phobia in the UK.
Slightly, not good. But like it's interesting because like one thing that's been proposed is like they look at levels of like estrogen and testosterone, if I understand properly. But like it's really funny because I think I read about like one board that was doing this, and then like a bunch of like, let's say, I don't know, biologically female, whatever, athletes like tested negative. And this is kind of the problem because it's like you know, when you're like high
When
level
you have
athleticism,
so much muscle, yeah, it
and high
actually
level
goes down.
athleticism isn't something that's based on like a state of physical normality. So if you take these
Yeah,
criteria that like apply to women in general, high level
yeah,
athletes are going to be the ones who that is least eligible to
yeah,
apply to.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. Same for ballet dancers, I know. Yeah, I guess, yeah, it's so weird that I don't know, because like, right, it's obvious that it's not fair.
Yeah.
But then we struggle so hard to find a way to make a criteria for making it fair. Yeah,
Well,
sometimes
yeah.
you should just be like, this isn't fair. Sorry. Like,
Well, that's kind of the weird thing about like women and men's sports in general, because it's like if you look at the NBA, right? It's like the average player is like, I don't know, like 6'8" or something, you know, and it's like, you know, and have like, it's like the physiques of the average players are quite similar as well, you know?
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like, and you look at someone like Shaquille O'Neal, you know, and it's like, and if you look at like that level where like most people pick up a basketball based on physical things are never going to have any chance of making it to the top. Just, you know, maybe if you're like my height, maybe if you're extremely skilled, you could be a point guard. That's the one position you could do, you know, that's it. Right. It's like, it seems a little bit arbitrary to say like men and women, you know, because it's like, we're all fucked. Like, you know, like, so why not, you know, what,
Why
like,
not
why
just
not,
have groups?
well, why not have groups or have other groups, or, you know what I mean? But it just seems like you could just as easily say like,
But if you
oh,
don't have
people are all this
groups,
height.
and
Yeah.
the bigger guys are just always gonna win. And it's not really fun to watch that, right? You want like equals or almost equals to compete against each other. I guess like
But
what
then
we
also look,
want at
boxing
the
has
end of the day is
platforms.
just to like prevent
Yeah.
dominance of a certain thing, like whatever that is, like whether it's gender or race or something. That's kind of what fairness is about. Like just stop the monopolizing.
Well, it's a debate, right? It's interesting. Like boxing has weight divisions, right, which are quite specific, and you know, but still, like it's like lightweight is not a popular. It's not a TV event like the way the heavyweight is, right? So it's like it's not like that's gonna, you know, and you know, it's like middleweight has a kind of interest because it's a very populated category, right? So it's associated with a high level of skill. But again, like you know, heavyweight, super heavyweight, these are the real, and middleweight just because of that, the size of it, right? But I'm saying like very few people are watching like featherweight. I got to see the featherweight championship of the world tonight. You know, it's like, so I mean, how far that can be as a solution is also.
But I mean, I guess then you can ask yourself like how many. I don't want to go. I don't want to go here. Let's just keep. Let's
Yeah,
just.
we should keep going. Yeah, because we have. But it's an interesting debate, and I think it does show. I think it's a good. It helps elucidate what Badia is saying here as well. So at the end of the section, we shall therefore say a truth is the infinite positive total, the gathering together of x pluses, of a procedure of fidelity which for each and every determinant of the encyclopedia contains at least one inquiry which avoids it. Such a procedure will be said to be generic for the situation. Our task is to justify this word generic, and on this basis, the justification of the word truth is inferred. So when there's a characteristic that doesn't align, right, when there's a kind of short circuit of the encyclopedic process of classification, right, that's where you kind of get this.
Yeah, it can be subsumed, I guess.
Yeah, that's sort of the idea.
Not quite is the one comment that I left in the whole book right here. Not quite.
So do truths exist? Evidently, everything hangs on the possibility of the existence of a generic procedure of fidelity. The question is both de facto and de jure. Yeah, I'm just going through this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love the.
But it was cute about the love. It was cute about the love. I like the love part. Is this where the love part was? Yeah, the individual love.
I mean, this just outlines.
And then she said like philosophy can do it, right?
No, he doesn't say philosophy. Actually, he says something a bit different. At such, love art. So here he outlines, because Badia,
Yeah, love art,
Badia
science,
chooses
politics.
from love, art, science, politics. At such, love, art, science, and politics generate infinitely truths concerning situations, truths subtracted from knowledge, which are only counted by the state in the anonymity of their being. All sorts of other practices,
literally says it, yeah.
yeah, possibly respectable, such as commerce, for example, and all the different forms of the service of goods, which are intricate in knowledge to various degrees, do not generate truths. I love these, just like.
But okay, then he says it.
I have to say that philosophy does not generate any truths either. However painful this admission may be. At best, philosophy is conditioned by the faithful procedure of its times. Philosophy can aid the procedure which conditions it precisely because it depends on it. It attaches itself via such intermediaries to the foundational events of the time. So a very Kantian conception of philosophy as well, right? A sort of descriptive function, right? A philosophy worthy of the name which began with Parmenides, is in any case antinomical to the service of goods, inasmuch as it endeavors to be at the service of truths. Philosophy is thus at the service of art, of science, and of politics. That it is capable, this is great. That it is capable of being at the service of love is more doubtful. On the other hand, art, a mixed procedure, supports truth of love. In any case, there is no commercial philosophy. I love that. I just love that. Just like he just like kind of got onto something, and he's like, nah.
I think I actually thought of Deleuze when he said that. Yeah, that it's at the service of love. Because I think Deleuze was quite into like understanding love in terms of philosophy.
Yeah, so was Badia. Yeah, well, I mean, he wrote a book on love, which I hate, but everybody loves it, because it's a book on love.
Yeah, I think I would hate it too.
You got it for your partner for Valentine's Day. You want a book on Badia on love? I think we need this 70-year-old French man in our relationship. But we'll talk about it.
I read Deleuze once after a breakup.
Okay. Yeah, but it could be therapeutic. Get kind of involved in that. Just gotta, like he says in Anti-Oedipe, right? You have to just accelerate the process of deterritorialization, right? It's good.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just destroy your personality. Smash it.
This was something, but this was something about I forget what it was. It was Proust. It was on Proust, a book on Proust. I got to like a third of it, and it was like I got to a point where like basically love doesn't exist. So I was like, no, like, stop. I can't deal with this now. Like I'm not in the state. Yeah. I mean, of course it does, just like not the way, we see it. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, and it also just, it seems to me that it would be like obligatory if you're aspiring to be like an intellectual in the French domain to like write something about Proust. You're like, then he took the Madelon.
Yeah, exactly. Fucking hell.
But yeah, so here at the very, we'll do the summary here. The conclusions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we there?
Do you wanna? Yeah, I'm there.
Hello. Sorry, guys.
Do you hear me? Do you not hear me?
Like, just making sure Mari is there.
Do you not hear me?
I got you now. Okay, good. So let's just go through the conclusions of this section. The conclusions of mathematical ontology are both clear and measured, very roughly. If the initial situation is denumerable, infinite, but just as whole numbers are, there exists a generic procedure. But this procedure, despite being included in the situation, it is a part of it, does not belong to it. It is not presented therein, solely represented. It is an excrescence. However, one can force a new situation to exist, a generic extension which contains the entirety of the old situation, in which this time the generic procedure belongs, is both presented and represented. It is normal. This point forcing is the step of the subject. In this new situation, if the language remains the same, thus if the primitive givens of knowledge remain stable, the generic procedure still produces indiscernibility. Belonging to the situation this time, the generic is an intrinsic indiscernible therein. Yeah, so this gap is sort of reproduced, right? In any Okay, interesting. Let's go to Meditation 32, Rousseau, which I actually don't want to spend too much time on, but I think there are some parts which are significant. Basically,
Yeah, I think I
Badiou.
already said this, but when he talks about other people, he's quick, he's on point, he's easy. It's almost enjoyable to read like him talking about other people's work, as opposed
Oh,
to
it's
his
very
own
interesting.
theories.
Oh, they're great. Yeah, the parts on other people in this. I mean,
Anything
I almost think
better.
it'd be worth publishing like a more accessible, because a lot of people are intimidated by being an event, but just
Hmm.
publishing like a more accessible, I think a distillation, like a distilled version of being an event would be a good idea, just with like maybe the introduction and those parts, like because
Yeah,
it's like a very, or just some key parts. Because this is a book, like I think
yeah.
you can
Or
read it.
actually doing the whole book, but like blackening out all the boring shit.
I mean, I think it has a reason to exist. It's just not everyone's not. It's not necessarily useful to most readers, right? So kind of.
Sorry, I like shit talking about him. It's fine.
I know. I noticed. Your choice, though. Your choice.
I know, I didn't know what I was asking for.
I mean, I kind of loved it. I was just like, "Oh, you want some bad? Yeah, then we're gonna do something." Okay, so this part of Meditation 32 is on Rousseau, and basically Badiou, I think his main point has to do with the general will in Rousseau and the way that it's conceptualized, and he accuses Rousseau of in a way making a mistake in his formulation, because Rousseau sort of, and this sort of explains the appeal of Rousseau to like the far right, for example, though he's a great influence on the left as well. So it's very complicated. But I mean, the far right today, I actually talked to a guy who is like Canadian. Yeah, I'm not just like, really, this is relevant because this is like the last time I had a philosophical discussion about Rousseau with someone, but he was like Serbian Canadian, and he's like all over like RT and stuff, and there's a thing of him on YouTube like talking about how great
What's
Mladic
RT?
was. Yeah, he's like on RT, like he's talking to RT, talking about how great Mladic is and stuff, like.
No,
But
but what is RT?
Russia Today.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. But he was talking about how much he loved Rousseau, and I think if you want to understand like the appeal of Rousseau to
It's
the far right
like
today.
Mladic, like the general.
Yeah, general. Yeah. He talks about
Ah.
how there's like 10-year-olds wearing like Mladic shirts like in Belgrade and stuff. I don't know if that's true, but
I hope not.
but this is, I think, if you want to talk about the appeal of Rousseau to the far right, and this is what Badiou criticizes. It's like Rousseau, he talks about the way that like there can be no that there can never be a representation of the general will. Like once it's like represented, it becomes like nothing,
Yeah.
right? And so in a way, I think like it acquires, the status of I think in a way it acquires a status a little bit akin to what Badiou assigns to infinity, right? There's like an unrepresentable aspect to it.
Yeah.
But there are still directives maybe which issue from it. But I think then Badiou's critique of Rousseau is that he goes too far in the direction of associating
The
general
majority
will.
with the actual general
Yeah,
will,
with like
which I find really
electoralism.
problematic. Yeah.
Yeah, and then at that point, and then you see why why
Like
the
I
appeal of
think
the
you
far.
made a good point about the representation, but then I didn't like, the fact that like everyone needs to, submit to the will of the majority as the general will. Like that's not at all that's not at all where I would go. Like I thought that he would go somewhere like, I don't know. That I don't know, like we would need something like true information, same access to knowledge, understanding, compassion, and so on. Then he's like, no, it's the majority.
Yeah, and he also has an interesting thing here of like the social contract and how the social pact and how it's like it's kind of evental in a way, like it's the condition of the foundation of like a real politics, and how like politics is more the accident than the rule, right? So in a way, there has to be like this kind of a kind of sovereignty or dedication or acceptance of this eventual rupture, this notion of a certain shared lineage, right, that grounds like an actual civil society, right, as opposed to it just being a society in which kind of anarchy prevails. And so he has a certain reading of Rousseau here in which like Rousseau's appeals to like Greece and Rome, and I think you could say the same of Machiavelli in a way, but like Rousseau's appeals to Greece or Rome mostly just function in kind of ornamental way. It's like whatever he's really trying to talk about, it's like, well, you can debate, you know, the historical integrity of these citations, but the point is that there has to be a kind of mythos, right, of the collective, right? So you can see why, again, I don't want to, Rousseau's most, you know, is pretty much the beginning of the left as far as I'm concerned, but you can see why in a contemporary context, you know, why there's a certain appeal for the far right. And it's interesting that you know, long before this sort of transpired in our modern discourse, that Badiou goes after the narrowness of the electoralist aspect, right? Sort of the ballot counting, you know, because that's kind of the strategy. And this is actually what we talked about the other day, right? That's sort of the strategy of the far right is it's like, oh, 51% of people hate the other 49. Okay, we're good to go. General will, right? But I think this is an absolutely great quote, and I'd like to put it up on Zero Books Capital Comrades, actually. But by the same token, it is ruled out that politics... Page 367. Yeah.
I got it.
By the same token, it is ruled out that politics be realizable in the election of representatives, since will does not admit of being represented. The deputies may have particular executive functions, but they cannot have any legislative function, because the deputies of the people are not and cannot be its representatives. And any law which the people has not ratified in person is null. It is not a law. The English parliamentary system does not impress Rousseau. According to him, there is no politics to be found therein. As soon as the deputies are elected, the English people, quote, is enslaved. It is nothing. If the critique of parliamentarism is radical in Rousseau, it is because far from considering it to be good or a bad form of politics, he denies it any political being, which also highlights the, you know, the difficulty when he resorts to sort of an electoralist conception to resolve, right, the question of what the general will is. But there's actually still a lot of textual debates that prevail about this. It's not like everyone thinks, oh, this is what Rousseau meant. Like, you know, I think there's probably like more of, because it mostly gets divided along, I think there's probably like more of a parliamentary or like liberal and maybe today right-wing reading of the will in an electorist way. And I think there's more of like a Leninist reading of the will as like transcending, you know, that sort of like reduction. But Rousseau's genius was to have abstractly circumscribed the nature of politics as generic procedure. Engaged, however, as he was in the classical approach, which concerns the legitimate form of sovereignty, he considered, albeit with paradoxical precautions, that the majority of suffrages was ultimately the empirical form of this legitimacy. He was not able to found this point upon the essence of politics itself, and he bequeaths us the following question. What is it that distinguishes, on the presentable surface of the situation, the political procedure? The essence of the matter, however, lies in joining politics not to legitimacy, but to truth, with the obstacle that those who would maintain these principles will have sadly told the truth and will have flattered the people alone. Rousseau remarks with a touch of melancholy realism. With a touch of melancholy realism? Okay. Truth does not lead to fortune, and the people confers no ambassadorships, professorships, or pensions. Which I also, you know, kind of like. Okay, now we get into the dirty stuff.
Cool. Okay.
Now we get into dirty. We're going into this is some pretty hard shit, and it's gonna be.
And I'm really happy that it's like 20 to 10 or 20 to 9 or whatever you are, because that means I can kind of rush through these.
Yeah, well, you're gonna lead. We got Meditation 33, the matheme of the indiscernible, Paul Joseph Cohen's strategy. So take it away.
Okay, so truth is post-evental. Actually, no, I'm not going to read this. Do we need any of this? Okay. Okay, so of course one cannot, this is 74. Of course one cannot speak of a multiple which is indiscernible in itself. Apart from the ideas of the multiple tolerating the supposition that every multiple is constructible, indiscernibility is necessarily relative to a criteria of the discernible, that is, to a situation and to a language. And then, so now we're trying to like define this in discernible. So we shall install ourselves in a multiple which is fixed once and for all, a multiple which is very rich in properties. It reflects a significant part of general ontology, yet very poor in quantity. It is the numerable. We will term this multiple a fundamental quasi-complete situation or a ground model. Okay, I will, due to a predilection whose origin I will leave the reader to determine, I will choose the symbol for this, like the feminine symbol for the inscription of this. It can be read generic multiple or generic. Oh no, sorry, generic multiple, generic being the adjective retained by mathematicians to designate the indiscernible, the absolutely indeterminate, which is to say a multiple that in a given situation solely possesses properties which are more or less common to all the multiples of the situation, or G, yeah. Cool, and then this is also not nameable. And since it's not nameable, we need to construct it through a procedure. The procedure is going to designate discernible multiples which have a certain relation to the indiscernible. Sorry, I underlined everything, but not everything is necessary. Okay, cool. So we're starting from this indiscernible multiple, the generic multiple, and then so we'll start from a multiple suppose existent in the initial situation, the quasi-complete situation, that is from a multiple which belongs to the situation. So this multiple will function in two different manners. On the one hand, its elements will furnish the substance multiple of the indiscernible, because they're going to be a part of the chosen multiple. And then on the other hand, these elements will condition the indiscernible in that they will transmit information about it. So I don't know, it's just like, it's a coding. It's a code that explains which elements belong to it. But because it doesn't have elements, because it's not discernible, the code is its material, like the code is its elements, but also it gives us information on what's in it. Okay. And I don't think that it's like it doesn't have elements. It's more that like there's an infinity of elements, or some elements could be, or maybe they don't need to be. So there's a little bit of a stuff there. Okay, cool. So yeah, so then it's the material and what he calls the intelligibility. So then we can call them the conditions. Blah, 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 that's fine. And then, cool. So then we go into the fundamental quasi-complete situation. So the ontological concept of a situation is an indeterminate multiple. The right situation must be as close as possible to the resources of ontology itself. It must reflect the ideas of the multiple in the sense that the axioms, or at least the most part of them, must be veridical within it. What does this mean? It means that the relativization to this multiple of the formula, which expresses the axiom, is veridical in this multiple, or that this formula is absolute for the multiple in question. So then he says, if we have a thing that belongs to another thing, or like I said, that belongs to another set, then also there is nothing else in this set, or like the, however you call this thing, when it's not the union, but the opposite of the union. Like the union is when you do this, and this is this, like the like the overlap of the things is nothing. So it's kind of unique.
Okay.
And yeah, so then we have this universe, which is the S. And we're supposing that it's a transitive set, which means that anything that is included in it also belongs in it. And which means that if it has a subset, anything that is in the subset is also in itself. So basically what he wants to say is that for an inhabitant of this universe, or like a thing in a subset, it is equally veridical that there exists this sort of unique condition. So then the final result is that we know that a transitive multiple S always reflects the axiom of foundation. From a standpoint inside such a multiple, there is always some other in an existent multiple, which is to say belonging to the transitive situation in question. So then, do we need to read these as well? Okay, so then we have these the hypothesis of this set, this universe. So there are 4 of them. So it verifies all the axioms of set theory, which can be expressed in one formula alone, because right, like the thing is unique, the condition is unique. So extensionality, union, parts, the void, infinity, choice, and foundation. Basically, we can talk about all of these things in this set, which we're going to talk about. And then it verifies at least a finite number of instances of those axioms, which can only be expressed by an infinite series of formula. That is separation and replacement. Or like, he's like, I need to talk about separation or replacement. So we're also going to talk about those. Which is fine. He's just saying like what he's like taking as granted, and then it's transitive, which means we have this like reflection, and what's included is belongs to blah. Basically, he says the count as one is homogeneous downwards, and then also you don't understand why, but this set is going to be infinite and enumerable, which means it can just be mapped to whole numbers. Which means it can be mapped to nature according to some other chapter before, which I remember, but I don't remember why. So basically, I think this set is like the world. Cool. So this is the quasi-complete situation or the model. So then. So then we place ourselves in this quasi-complete situation to add the indiscernible to it. I remember not really understanding this when I was reading it, but then he talks about it later again, and I was getting it then. So I'm just gonna wait for that.
Okay.
But then so also yeah, there are also these like absolute parts, which I don't really remember how they fit in, but we might as well say them out loud. So then we also have the absolute things in this quasi-complete situation. Something can be ordinal. So the ordinal for an inhabitant of S, like a thing in S, or actually like a thing in the subset in S, are exactly those ordinals which belong to S in the sense of general ontology. The first limit ordinal, which is, and thus all of its elements as well. So the whole number. So I think that adds us to like absolutely map it, lets us absolutely map it to nature. And the set of finite parts of a subset in which, in the sense in which the subset is a subset, sorry, just reading the math here, the set of finite parts is counted as one. I don't remember why he uses this, but yeah, these are things that like are absolute. Then the power set isn't. But yeah, then basically the last sentence he says, nature, even infinite, is absolute. Infinite quantity is relative, which is the power set. So I think, right, like he's not talking about like an infinity of actual things that can go on in infinity, more like an infinity of representations in nature. So basically, we're talking about our world here.
Okay.
Cool. Then the conditions in this world, material and sense. Okay, so these are this pretty basic actually. He says, is this where he talks about dominant? Oh no, so we have the conditions. The conditions can be compatible or incompatible. Basically, if and they can sort of be subsumed in one another. So if you have like a condition that is 0 and 1, and you have a condition that is 0, 1, 1, the 0, 1, 1 can be subsumed under 0, 1, because, well, like it's just less, or like it gives us less information or more information, I forget. Oh, it's more, but it's like a reinforcement. So for 0, 1, 1 to be a condition, a 0, 1 must be a condition. And then if you have a 0, 1 condition, a 1, 0 condition is incompatible, because that would basically that would divide the things, right, into like the things that satisfy the condition and things that don't satisfy the condition. And that's the stuff that we do in knowledge, because we draw the line. And here we only care about the positive stuff that reaffirms the event, because otherwise we're not talking about the event. So basically, like, you need to have this compatibility in the conditions because you want everything to affirm the event. And then, like, if you have more conditions, what he wants to say is that there's like a super condition, and then everything else that comes after it needs to be compatible with it. So it needs to relay the same amount of information or more, but like at least the same amount. So that's that. Then 3 correct subset or part of the set of conditions. We will term correct set a set of conditions which aim at the one multiple of part, of some part of the model. Oh, so this is about dominating. So it's very similar to like the thing relaying more information. So I think the thing with the less information actually dominates, but there's going to be the diagram thingy soon. So yes. So what has less, and so that actually the thing that has more information, I don't want to say the word dominates, but like the thing that has more information subsumes in itself the thing that has less information, because it comes after the thing with less information. So if you have 0, 1, then you have 0, 1, 1, but in the 0, 1, 1, the 0, 1 is already implied. So basically that means is that the null set condition or the null condition or the null condition is implied in all the conditions. Or like the empty set belongs to every correct set. So it's the minimal condition, the 0 degree condition. Basically, like this is gonna, like this empty thing is gonna allow us to do everything. So it's a very important moment. And I'm calling bullshit right now, but okay. And then we also have this like thing when we have 2 conditions. So, and I think that was already mentioned in the last one, but given 2 conditions, there exists a condition which dominates both of them. And again, the point is that like you can't have contradictory conditions because you always want the positive thing to affirm the event. Okay, indiscernible or generic subset. So if a correct part of the set is discerned by some property, then every element of that set, that is every condition of the set, because element is just a condition, right? The information is dominated by another condition where the other condition is the negation of the first condition. So that's where the diagram thingy is, the little circle stuff. So on the outside, we have a condition of like only having ones in the rule. And another way to say is that there are no zeros if you only have ones. And so a negation of there are no zeros is there's at least 1 0. So the negation of that rule is in the, it's inside. And so basically that thing dominates the other thing. And the reason we can easily see that is because the at least 1 0, or like if you start from the other one, he starts from the other one first. But so having no zeros, example 1 1 1, having at least 1 0, example 1 1 1, comma 0, and that has more information, so it dominates, it subsumes. So the negation of a thing always subsumes the thing because it has a thing and it negates it, which I also don't like. But okay. So that's that. And then he just does the same thing without like the example, and which means without the actual conditions. But yeah, he just says like a negation of a condition dominates the condition itself. And then he says every correct discernible set is therefore totally disjoint from at least one domination, that is, from the domination constituted by the conditions which do not possess its discerning property. So a negation of the thing, yeah, that doesn't have an overlap with the thing, which makes sense. Well, actually, no, it does have an overlap. It contains the thing, but the other thing doesn't have an overlap. So all ones don't have an overlap with anything that is in 1 1 1, comma 0. But 1 1 1, comma 0 does dominate the 1 1 1, or like it does contain it within itself. So in one, you have subsuming from one point of view, from the other point of view, you have nothing. It's completely disjoint. Okay, cool. Yeah, so a contrario, if a correct set intersects every, cool. So cool. So that's actually how we do the thing. So this is discernibility, right? Because when you have a negation, then you can say that like all the stuff that are here don't belong here. And so you're starting to discern. So what he's saying is that like if you don't want to discern, you want a thing that can be in a thing and its negation, or mostly there. I think. So if a correct set intersects, okay, so every correct discernible set is therefore totally disjoint from at least one domination, that is, from the domination constituted by the conditions which do not possess its discerning property. Of course, the intersection of that and of what remains when that is removed is necessarily empty. A contrario, if a correct set intersects every domination, that is, has at least one element in common with every domination, then this is definitely because it is indiscernible. Otherwise, it would not intersect the domination, which corresponds to the negation of the discerning property. So we will posit that our general multiple must intersect, have at least one element common with every domination. So all those which exist for an inhabitant of the universe, yes, the set, that is which, I shouldn't be calling it universe, that is which belong to the quasi-complete situation. Cool. So I think this is actually the paragraph where he explains why it doesn't have to be. Or he says, remember that a domination is actually a part of the set of conditions. And the power set of these conditions is not absolute. Thus, there are perhaps dominations which exist in the sense of general ontology, but which do not exist for inhabitant of S. So the negation of the thing, that's how he does it. So the negation of the thing doesn't necessarily exist. Like we can theoretically posit that it exists, but it's not necessarily like existing in being. And truth or the event is always existing in being. So you can cut through all the shit because the shit that you can cut through is not here right now. Cool. So
And the use of the feminine sign is interesting too, right? Because you have the quote by Lacan, right? La femme n'existe pas, right? Which is like, woman is like a kind of
is that right?
Which I think that might be connected to it. Like it's the idea that like women are sort of conceived of
as
secondarily,
negative.
as a negative in relation to men.
How does this? I'm not sure. Okay, let's go. I'm not sure if because like here we're trying to get away from the negativity. But are we? Okay. But I guess we got through here to the negativity, right? Because like negating gives us discernible. So non-negating gives us undiscernible. Okay.
Yeah. Are we on to 34 now? Is that it?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the last thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, just one sentence. So one can grasp quite easily the root of the indeterminateness, the indiscernibility of the general. It contains a little bit of everything, in the sense that it has an element in each determinant. Cool. So that's it. Cool. So we're on to 34. Okay. Let me just see how.
So 34 is the existence of the indiscernible, the power of names. Yeah, meditation 34.
So I'm like mostly okay with this one. Okay. So okay. Okay, so does this multiple of conditions, which I think exist? That is the question. And okay, he's repeating himself. Oh, is this where he? Oh yeah, this is a good point. So the general multiplicity, being generic, should intersect every domination which belongs to S, and so intersect its own exterior, which is absurd. But since no generic subset exists in this situation, indiscernibility remains an empty concept. The indiscernible is without being. In reality, an inhabitant of S can only believe in the existence of an indiscernible. insofar as it exists, it is outside the world. The employment of a clear concept of the indiscernible could give rise to such a fate with which this concept's void of being might be filled. But existence changes its sense here because it is not assignable to the situation. So, yeah, for an inhabitant of S, in any case, it seems that God alone can be indiscernible. Oh, sorry, my kid's gonna go. So give me just a second. But he's gonna argue against this, right? Okay, so let's just read this. But yeah, it seems like, but why do we think it can only exist outside here? Okay, let's just pause my confusion here and move on. So okay, the indiscernible exists. Okay, so now he talks about like taking that outside position, the eye of the God. And he's trying to, what is he trying to do here? So he's trying to create the enumerable list of the denominations of conditions which belong to S. So basically all the dominations of all of the conditions. So we can start from one condition, and if we have another condition, then either, so like assume a condition, and then if you have another condition, either, okay, so either that other condition is in the domination of the next condition, which I don't get why it's the next condition, but it doesn't really matter, which means that it's the same, or like that condition is going to be the same as this condition, or it's in its negation. Wait. So we have the first, the indeterminate, and then Pn belongs to Dn plus 1, and then Pn plus 1 is Pn. I don't understand why it has to belong to the next domination and not its own denomination. But maybe this.
You muted yourself by accident. You're still muted. Yeah, okay, there you
go. So yeah, I'm not getting why he goes to the next denomination, but I think it's just because he started from an index 0 and then he goes to the 1. But basically what he's gonna say is that starting from the first condition, it's gonna be like dominated, or like that domination is going to be dominated by the next one and by the next one and by the next one, which means, or actually by the previous one and the previous one and the previous one, which means that the condition is going to subsume the previous condition and the previous condition and the previous condition. And so he does this recurrence thing. So because each condition is derived through the previous condition, what you really need to do is you need to derive the null condition and the first condition, and you just recursively go back. So that's the only determined, or like that's the only thing that you need. And we do this because of the stuff that we posited in the beginning of the last chapter, where like the two conditions need to be compatible because we only want the positivity. And for them to be compatible, if they're different, one subsumes the other, or like it gives more information than the other. But the one that gives more information can be defined by the previous one and some stuff, whatever. And that one is defined by the previous and some stuff. And so it's the first one that he cares about. And the first one is going to be the null one. And we know that the null one exists because it doesn't really do anything. So we don't have a problem with its existence. Or like if we assumed that it does exist, we don't get to an absurd situation because it doesn't really say anything. So we can assume that it does exist. So we basically recursively get all the conditions from the no condition. Okay, so okay, let me see. So that's 393, that's fine. So why is this? Okay. So I guess with this, we prove the existence of a general multiple, but what we haven't proven is the existence of a general multiple. Oh, because we took the God I, that we took the God I to do the recursion because we needed to be outside to look at all the dominations and all the conditions because like the number one or whatever count of one doesn't really exist. So you need to be outside of the thing to see the thing. Like you can't see everything from within a thing because the power set is an absolute. So we saw the thing is good, but that like just means that the general multiple exists. It doesn't mean that it exists within a situation, within a set for this particular set. And that's what we want to prove. Okay. So the entire question resides in knowing to which situation the general multiple belongs. Its floating exteriority to S cannot satisfy us because it is quite possible that it belongs to an as yet unknown extension of the situation, in which, for example, it would be constructible with statements of the situation and thus completely discernible. I guess that's the thing, like the statements or the language or the knowledge of the situation is only defined within the situation. There is no general knowledge. So in order to know that it makes a whole in knowledge, you have to know that it exists there in that specific context. Okay, I'm just gonna skip through this, the last half a page. So denomination of the indiscernible. So now we're gonna name the thing which we can discern. Because I think like in the situation, we have to name everything. That's what it means to be inside the set. Like everything is presented or whatever. So we're naming the unnameable. Basically, we're gonna, this just tricks from now on. So I didn't underline that. Okay. So is Okay, a name is a multiple whose elements are pairs of names and conditions. So if we have U1, a name, where there's an element A in U1, then A is, or we name the A, where A is like UT pi is the condition. What is U2? Oh, it's a name of the next condition, of the next indiscernible. Okay, so basically we're gonna go recursive again. So we have a name and the condition. So let me just try and wing this. We have the general multiple. It has the conditions. What we're gonna do is we're gonna name it, but we're gonna name it by concatenating the name of the previous guy and the conditions of this guy, which we know. So then we go backwards, and the only name which we need to know is the first name, and that's the name of the null set, because it doesn't have any conditions, so we can actually name it. So is that what he does? I think that's totally what he does. That is totally what he does. Okay. So general referent of a name and extension by the indiscernible. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so now we have the name through the conditions, because we had the conditions because of the no condition. So now that we have the name, we can tie the name to a thing that it names. So like we have the French Revolution, and because we have the French Revolution, now we can actually go and see what the French Revolution was. Or we can tie the thing to the name, the event to its name, supernumerary or whatever it is. So how are we gonna do that? So for elements, we have a name and a condition. The referential value of a name can only be defined on the basis of these two types of multiples, names and conditions, since a pure multiple can only give what it possesses, which is to say what belongs to it. This definition is just as circular as the definition of the name. You define the referential value by supposing that you can determine that of the previous one. So he does the same thing. But I guess what is the value of a null set condition? Nothing or everything? Whatever. We just go recursively, basically. Let me just get to the last one. For example, the name. Okay, yeah. So for example, the name null set condition has the referential value of the null set if the condition belongs to the general multiple, and the value null if it does not belong to the general multiple. Okay. All of this is clear to an inhabitant of S who possesses a concept void of the generic part and can thus inscribe intelligible implications of the genre. So I guess, let me just, if it does not belong to the general. So it's like the general multiple, the null set, the name of the void, but in practice, if it doesn't belong to a general, which means it's a particular, the void designates nothing. So that's what he's trying to say. So he's kind of defined it for outside and for inside. And then you use that for every next one because it's a recursive definition. So that's kind of fine. Yeah, that's kind of fine. Okay, the fundamental situation is a part of any generic extension, and the indiscernible general multiple is an element of any generic extension. Canonical names. If, for example, we want to show that the fundamentals, if I'm reading, it means I didn't get this. If, for example, we want to show that the fundamental situation is included in the generic extension, that the set S belongs to the S of the general multiple, which alone guarantees the meaning of the word extension, because we're adding the stuff, we're adding the general multiples. He said that at some point before, which I didn't quite understand why we're doing that, but we're adding them. Which alone guarantees the meaning of the word extension. We have to show that every element of S is also an element of the S of the general multiple. But the generic extension is produced as a set of values, reference of names. What we have to show, therefore, is that for every element of S, a name exists, such as the value of this name in the extension is this element itself. Okay, why are we doing this again? I mean, we're doing it again recursively, but I don't understand what's the difference between the canonical name and the name. The canonical name of an element A of the fundamental situation S is, this name is composed of all the pairs. It's the null set. Cool. So, but why does he need it? I don't understand why he needs a canonical name. But it's recursive again. So it's the same thing that he does again. Like you define this one by the previous one and you go that way until the first one. And the first one is the null and he can say it, so it's fine. Then he says on 402, the canonical name is therefore the set of ordered pairs constituted by the canonical names of the elements of the set and by the minimal condition null. Now, and this is the crux of the affair, the referential value of the canonical name is A itself, whatever the supposed generic part. These canonical names invariably name the multiple which we have constructively associated them with. Okay, so then the canonical name is the actual value because we had a name that ties to a value, but then the canonical name is just the value. So that kind of makes sense. I think that kind of makes sense. It's a bit circular. The recurrence is complete. There exists a canonical name such that the value, its referent, in any generic extension is the multiple itself. Being the general multiple, referent of a name for any general multiple, extension of S, every element, cool. Every element of S belongs to this extension. So we're thus quite justified in speaking of an extension of the fundamental situation. The latter is included in any extension by an indiscernible, whatever it might be. So then canonical name of the indiscernible. What has not yet been shown is that the indiscernible belongs to the extension. We know that it does not belong to S. I think this is where I start losing it. This is totally where I start losing it. So there's a whole paragraph that I didn't get. But then he says the fundamental point is that having a fixed name, the generic part always belongs to the extension. So basically, to know that it belongs, one has to demonstrate that it has a name. So we know they have canonical names. The set of all ordered pairs constituted by a canonical name of a condition, followed by that condition. This set is a name by the definition of names, and it is a name in S, which can be shown by arguments of absoluteness. Okay. What could its referent be? It is certainly going to depend on the generic part of the generic multiple, which determines the value of the names. Take then some fixed generic multiple. By the definition of the referential value, it is a set of values of the names when they belong to the general multiple. So basically he's just saying, like, because we've derived the name from the conditions for the general multiple, what other multiple could it point to, I think. The fixed name will invariably designate in a generic extension the part of the general multiple from which the extension originates. We thus find ourselves in possession of a name for the indiscernible, a name, however, which does not discern it. For this nomination is performed by an identical name, whatever the indiscernible. It is the name of indiscernibility, not the discernment of the indiscernible. So I guess because the name is made out of the conditions of the indiscernible, it's not like a thing. It's just a prescription for the name. So whatever the indiscernible is, based on its conditions, you can have the name for it. So it's not like we've named the French Revolution. We've named the French Revolution because it was a revolution in France. Right, those were its conditions. Maybe it can get more complex than that, but I think that's pretty much it. Okay, we've gone through that. So 6 and 7. Okay. I don't want to. I really didn't get these two.
6 and 7?
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's take a look here. On the other hand, all the ordinals of S are the generic extension. Therefore, the ordinals of the generic extension are exactly the same as those of the fundamental situation. In the end, the extension is neither more complex nor more natural than the situation. The addition of an indiscernible modifies it slightly, precisely because an indiscernible does not add explicit information to the situation in which it is indiscernible.
I guess like he was saying that we are adding the general multiple to a thing, or like we're adding truth to the event. And we define the indiscernible through the extension, right? Which points to it. So he's just talking about the indiscernible. So he's saying it's not more complex or more natural than the situation. Because the indiscernible does not add explicit information to the situation in which it is indiscernible, because we've constructed it only through the conditions which created, which is the event itself, I guess. That's the best I got.
Okay. And on 7, do you have anything for that? The indiscernible subtracts itself from any explicit nomination in the very situation whose operator it nevertheless is, having induced it in excess of the fundamental situation in which its lack is thought. What must be recognized therein, when it inexists in the first situation under the supernumerary sign feminine, is nothing less than the purely formal mark of the event whose being is without being, and when its existence is indiscerned in the second situation, nothing less than the blind recognition by ontology of a possible being of truth.
Cool.
Okay. Well, it has been 1 hour and a little bit of indiscernment, no pun intended, with the
it took an hour again.
An hour and 45 minutes. Intrinsic or in situation indiscernibility. But I think this was mostly a fairly coherent read through of some I think this is the most complex part of being an event. Obviously, thank you very much to Mari for being here, because I couldn't do the mathematical parts.
I think if people actually read the thing, like, they could follow me. I don't know if they could follow me if they didn't read the thing.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think hopefully, hopefully for posterity, we will have generated a useful resource for people to use. Because I said before, I was very proud to say that I don't think on YouTube there exists another whole read through of being an event. So if we can make it just one more week, because next week we're going to be on part 8, then we will have been the first people in the English speaking world, anyway, my YouTube algorithm. Don't you guys own that? Doesn't Google own? Oh, Google owns YouTube, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But call them up at work. Tell them to boost us in the algorithm, because we're
Dude, I don't want people to watch this.
Well, I think you're doing.
People actually know the math, and so they're gonna be like, embarrassing, Maddie. You could have done so much better.
Well, I think given that your likely basis of comparison is just to a lot of people in philosophy, I think that
Yeah. Okay.
It'll seem pretty impressive. Anyway, thank you for tuning in to this session on being an event, and this session was part 7, the generic, indiscernible, and truth, the event. Paul Joseph Cohen, and next week. So that is on January 5th. That's good for you, Mari?
Yeah.
January 5th. Next week on January 5th, we will be finishing up being an event with part 8, forcing truth in the subject beyond Lacan. And that includes 3 meditations. And then perhaps after that, we'll have the opportunity to do a sort of postmortem on, we'll usher in the new year with part 8, as well as a postmortem on Badiou, in which we'll discuss, I think, some of the critiques of Badiou that have been made, and by Adrian Johnston, for example, as well as Francois Laruelle. And I think Mari is going to want to talk a little bit about the relationship between Badiou and Deleuze. They were both professors at the University de Paris 8, Avançon, and there was a lot of acrimony between them. So some difference in that. But yeah, thank you guys so much. It's been 1 hour and 48 minutes. This has been a Zero Books Capital Comrades special on being an event. Conrad Hamilton, you don't need to know my name, and Mari, and broadcasting out to the Rosencast. So special thanks there too to Elliot Rosenstock for having us both literally and metaphorically on his wavelength. Anyway, have a good night.